Good evening and welcome to Economics Unbound. Hello Nana and hello dear viewer. Have you all noticed that since the lockdown was implemented in South Africa, prices have jumped up? It's like magic. It's like witchcraft. Now, perhaps some are saying that South Africa needs better food price controls to shield the poor from COVID-19 economic fallout.
Good evening, Tans and dear viewer. Tans, prices have increased indeed. SNAFE is worse. With South Africa's hard lockdown restrictions beginning to ease, it is becoming clear that many companies use the pandemic as an opportunity to profiteer. The Competition Commission received over 800 complaints about pricing during the lockdown period. So far, these complaints have resulted in almost 30 convictions and settlements, with millions of rands in fines levied.
That's true, Nana. A hardware shop, for example, allegedly increased the price of surgical gloves from 100 to 170 in a single week. A pharmacy put a more than 300% markup on the price of face masks and hand sanitizers, and a supplier of face masks increased their prices by a whopping 665%.
That's crazy, Tans. And also, Dis-Chem grabbed the headlines when it was found guilty of excessive pricing and was fined 1.2 million rands. The Competition Commission's investigation showed that the national pharmacy chain had inflated the average prices of 3 types of face masks by between 43% and 261% between February and March this year. When Dis-Chem was first accused, Chief Officer Ivan Saltzman denied that the prices were excessive. In its public reasons document, the tribunal noted Dis-Chem's pricing conduct of successive massive price increases in March demonstrates that it exploited this crisis.
Yes, it's true that a lot has happened to prices during this pandemic. Now, COVID-19 has wrought havoc on poor households in countries across the world. In South Africa, more and more people are facing hunger as a result of mass job losses and poverty that was prevalent even before the lockdown. And small and poorly implemented supplementary cash that comes from government or the grants that were announced have barely reached the poor. On top of this, the pandemic has put in stark relief the country's poorly understood food system, in which powerful firms operate with little oversight, while vulnerable actors in the informal food sector face regulation.
When the country went into lockdown on the 26th of March 2020, the government placed the formal food sector at the center of continued food supply. Informal food vendors were restricted. Yet, these vendors provide an important source of food and livelihoods for the majority of South Africa's population. The South African Constitution recognizes the right to food. But the government's failure to enact specific legislation on food rights has resulted in incoherent food security policies. Even the smallest increases in prices of products in the basic food basket can have a significant impact on poor households and in local markets. Therefore, access to affordable and nutritious food through formal and informal food markets is critical for ensuring people's rights to food.
Now, during the most severe part of the lockdown in the country, the government addressed the issue of higher food prices by concluding an agreement with major retailers to limit price increases on key items. But this lapsed immediately after the first easing of the lockdown on May the 4th. Since then, retailers have increased prices of certain food items in response to higher input prices. We believe a renewed list of price limits should be put in place. Now, let's listen to more of what prices are doing to the poor and to the economy. And my producer, Prudence Makubalo, has prepared this report.
When the COVID-19 lockdown went into effect on the 27th of March, the range of products available to households for purchase was restricted to a set of defined essential goods and services. Since the beginning of the lockdown, Stats SA has been measuring price changes for those essential goods that appear in the Consumer Price Index basket. Now let's look back. In April, the prices of essential products increased on average by 0.3% between the week ending on the 2nd of April, which is the first week of the lockdown, and the week ending on the 16th of April. The second week of lockdown saw the prices of the essential items increase by 0.5% week on week, followed by a decrease of 0.2% in the third week. Although the number of consumers saying their household income has been negatively impacted dropped to its lowest level of 77% since the first round of surveys in April, and much lower than the 84% peak observed in June. The pandemic is still impacting financial conditions for the vast majority of households. The respondents reported that job losses continue to increase, with 21% of financially impacted consumers reporting that they have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic, up from 10% in April. Consumer inflation accelerated in July, but remains well within the Reserve Bank's target bracket. Stats SA data shows consumer price inflation was 3.2% in July, up from 2.2% in June. The main contributors to the uptick were food and non-alcoholic beverages, housing and utilities, and miscellaneous goods and services. Food and non-alcoholic beverages increased by 4.3% year-on-year and contributed 0.7 of a percentage point to the total CPI annual rate. Housing and utilities increased by 3.2% year-on-year and contributed 0.8 of percentage point. Economists say the uptick is on the back of fuel price increases in the month of municipal rates and taxes. Water and power charges continue to record stable but high rates of inflation in July. Subdued inflation also allows the Reserve Bank from room to further lower the repo rate to boost economic activity and try to repair damage caused by coronavirus pandemic.
Now, to discuss further, we have the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group Program Coordinator, Mervyn Abrams. Good evening, Mervyn. How are you? Thanks for joining us again on Economics Unbound. What's happening to the prices? Good evening,
Thandeka, and good evening to all your viewers.
Thank you. I was thanking you for joining us, but tell us what's happening to prices.
So, Thandeka, we are seeing that prices are continuing to increase. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Thank you. So what we have seen is a continuous increase of prices during lockdown. The prices stabilized in June. We saw a drop in the price of our food basket in July. But in August, we are seeing an increase again.
Okay, Mervyn, can you explain that trajectory? Why the increase when the lockdown was implemented and a decrease in July and now another increase in August? Can you explain those fluctuations in the prices of basic commodities and food?
So some of it we can explain, but of course there are also other factors, as you have mentioned previously, which is that the food system in itself is not transparent.
Right.
But what we did see and contributed to some of these increases is that the smallholder farmers could not bring some of their goods into the informal sector for sale. And so everybody had to go to the big retail stores, which in a sense increased the price.
Now, before we talk about the supply chain disruptions and what the medium and small farmers experienced during the lockdown, you said something very interesting. You said that the food industry is intransparent and the big players hold sway there. And they are promoting this lack of transparency to the detriment of the poor. I suppose that's what you were trying to communicate. But can you tell us how it is intransparent and what can be done about this lack of transparency?
So what we do know, for instance, Tandeka, is that we can get the farm gate price. So we know what farmers are selling their produce for.
Right.
We know what the prices are on the retail shelf.
Right.
It's the system in between, the manufacturing. And so what we have been calling for is a commission of inquiry to see what the different levels of manufacturing are and the market dominance of certain players, because the market dominance also affect what manufacturers can charge. It is that process between the farm gate and the retail sector that we do not have much information on.
Yes, and if you are dominant and you're a monopoly in some parts of this industry, you can call the shots on prices, and that would account for the hiking of some prices. But for many poor people, the stimulus package and the increased grants were what stood between them and poverty and absolute hunger in many households. Now, I understand that if the prices of food are hiking, and most of the research says that most of that stimulus went to the purchase of food, so these price hikes are chewing up the national stimulus.
Yes, exactly. And what that also means is that people are now dependent on that top up of the grants. So if that grant top up comes to an end in October, as was announced previously, then we will see an increase of poverty and hunger across the country.
What do you think will happen to
we
basic household goods like cooking oil, bread, and so on when that grant is withdrawn? Many households will not be able to afford even that. Do you anticipate that retailers will then just lower the price to taper the prices according to reduced demand at that point?
Well, we are not expecting any drop in prices. That's very difficult because in the food sector, we seem to see upward trends. It might stabilize as it did in June, but it tends to be on the upward trend.
And now what role
what
role is the oil price playing in the upward trend?
So the oil price, of course, is a major input cost right across the sector. I mean, it's used on the farm in terms of tractors. It's a major input into manufacturing. It's a major input in creation of plastics, so wrapping and so on. And of course, the whole logistics, transporting food from the factory to the store. So when we see the price of petrol increasing, then we generally a month or two later, we see an increase also in food prices.
Now, Mervyn, with the time you and I have left, I always have fun going through your basket of goods and you telling me which goods have jumped up and which goods have remained relatively stable. Can you take us through the basket?
So we have seen, I'm going to give you the figures from March to August, because that's the lockdown period. So we've seen maize meal increase by 17 Rand and 39 cents. That's a 35 kg. We've seen rice, 10 kgs increase by 24 Rand. 10 kgs white sugar went up by 13 Rand. We've seen cooking oil increase by 11 Rand. The one good news is that the price of chicken has generally come down. It's come down by 16 Rand. The price of fresh produce, like potatoes, has just gone berserk. I mean, we've seen it. It's increased by something like 15 Rand for 10 kgs.
Alarming.
So perhaps one good thing I could say that we have learned from the COVID-19 is that the smallholder farmer plays a critical role in the provision of fresh produce
Well,
into the
unfortunately,
informal sector.
Unfortunately, Mervyn, we've run out of time. And on that note, thank you very much for joining us from Pietermaritzburg. Well, then, chicken it is. Chicken has gone down. Well, a great discussion we had. Nana, what do you think?
While the expansion of social protection measures does in part contribute to access to food for poor and vulnerable households, government should play a role in monitoring and regulating the food sector to ensure a more equitable and sustainable food system for consumers and actors in informal food markets. Price limits should be complemented by an inquiry into the price setting of major retailers.
Welcome back. The effects of COVID-19 will endure for some time to come, including large-scale job losses, and so it is certainly not too late to intervene. Poorer South African households cannot continue to endure both a crisis of joblessness, poverty, and food price increases.
I still remember, Tans, that 11 firms were under investigation for hiking their prices as the demand for products used to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 increased. There were complaints about individuals and firms increasing prices unjustifiably. The Consumer and Competition Commissions met and investigated 11 firms found to be selling products like face masks and hand sanitizers for high prices and abusing the situation.
The government announced that if companies hike the price of basic food items, medical and hygiene supplies, or stockpile goods, they could be liable for a fine of up to 1 million Rand, or 10% of their annual turnover, or jail time of up to 12 months.
Yes, that's true, Tans. It also published a list of 22 products that it said the two regulators, the Consumer and Competition Commissions, would monitor to ensure that there are no unjustified price increases. These include basic foods, personal care products, and hygiene products such as disinfectants and sanitizing and cleaning agents, as well as key medical supplies like surgical masks and gloves.
Now, it's quite common that the CGSO, which is the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman, provides a recourse mechanism for consumers dealing with businesses operating within the consumer goods and services supply chain. On Skype now, we have the Consumer Goods and Services Ombuds CEO. Welcome, Queen Moyai. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Thanks for joining us. What has the Ombuds seen? Many complaints, I imagine.
Absolutely. My office, in the past 5 months of lockdown, we were inundated with complaints, mainly cancellations, returns. As we all know that consumers have 6 months automatic warranty for any goods and services that they purchase. If they are not happy with them, they are allowed to return them to the retailer for a recourse of either a refund, a repair, or a replacement. So because of the lockdown, most of the businesses were not allowed to operate. They were closed down. So consumers found themselves stranded without being able to return any goods or services. Or sometimes because some of the suppliers were operating under very limited staff, they were taking time to respond to the consumer. So we have seen a general significant increase in the number of complaints.
Now, let me do my public service duty and ask you to tell the public and the viewer what exactly the core mandate of the organization that you lead is.
Our mandate as the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud, we are an alternative dispute resolution body, which is we are an alternative to the National Consumer Commission. So consumers can either approach the National Consumer Commission, or they can, after not being happy with how the complaint was handled at the retail, they can escalate their complaints to us. So our mandate is to mediate those complaints, to find an amicable way of resolving complaints between consumers and suppliers.
Now, do you have a sort of judicial standing? Are you a point to go to the first point of call before people can go either to the Consumer Council or to court?
Absolutely, yes. We are the first point of call. As I said earlier, that we are an alternative to the consumer. So to avoid a much more formal environment, which is the National Consumer Commission, the consumers can approach us. The first call will be the supplier, where the consumers get their goods or services. If they are not happy about how the complaint was handled, they can escalate to us. So our approach is not a legalistic one. We try and mediate between the consumer and the supplier and find a much more amicable way to resolve those complaints.
Now, what are you seeing? Are you seeing people who are just really fed up with those price hikes? Did you see our previous guest? He said that prices of basic foodstuffs that every household needs have just hiked up.
Absolutely. We have seen that. We have seen amongst all the complaints that we have seen around returns, around cancellations, we have also seen that consumers made their way to our office to report those price-related complaints that they had. And we have seen that despite the president's call and appeal to the retailers not to really charge exorbitant prices, we found that suppliers are still going ahead and hiking prices. And unfortunately, the South Africans had to be on the receiving point. So it is really, really a problem that we have seen even through our offices. Over the past few months, we have received about 40 complaints which relate to pricing. And those, for us, when we looked, 36% of those were related to food and beverages, 33% was home care, including the masks and sanitizers, followed by the computer accessories, as we are aware that most of the consumers most of the staff from different offices had to operate or work from their homes. So what we have seen is that when some of them had to buy some computer equipment or office furniture, we saw that when they went to the suppliers, the prices were quite high. So yes, we have seen quite a lot of those.
Now, beyond the mediation of these conflicts, since this extortionate pricing is such a rampant behavior by businesses, don't you think that the arm of the state should really muscle in to right some wrongs here? That there
Yes,
should be
absolutely.
extraordinary measures taken to calm the prices.
Yes, measures, I believe that they are being taken, and I'm aware that the National Consumer Commission, they've reported that they have received more than 3,000 complaints. And as I've said earlier, because the National Consumer Commission, their role is also, they also have the role to investigate those. So we are going to see a lot of more than the ones that have already been investigated. We're going to see more and more suppliers being under a harsh hand of the law, being taken through investigation over those price hiking, because it is quite a serious contravention of the Consumer Protection Act. And obviously, we know that sometimes the hand of the law will take a little bit longer, but I must assure you that really there's something that the Commission is doing about this.
Now, I sense some kind of collaboration between you as the ombudsperson and the ombudsman in this area and the Commission. Can you tell us about your collective plans to halt the rapid rise in prices, especially as they will be affecting the South African population very adversely when the grant system is withdrawn in October?
Yeah, I think there are measures already in place where we work very closely with the NCC, and what we do as an alternative dispute resolution body, when we have exhausted all the means within our reach to resolve those complaints, what we do, those that cannot be closed at our level, we escalate to the National Consumer Commission. And indeed, we will see, since it is said that this pandemic is still going to be with us for a while, we expect that there's still going to be more and more suppliers who are going to contravene this, and we are working very closely together to make sure that we really mitigate this risk that we can see in the industry.
Now, I imagine that your office will be inundated with complaints in August because of the rise now again in food prices. How are you going to handle this? Do you have sufficient resources, and is the budget sufficient for this?
Unfortunately, as a industry-funded organization, I wouldn't say we have enough resources to deal with that. But this pandemic has really prepared us, and we have managed to set up staff to work remotely. And most of our staff are really working remotely and making sure that the calls are being received, consumer complaints are being addressed throughout this period. So we are ready, and we are working to make sure that we use technology to also try and make sure that all our complaints that we receive are being taken care of. Yes, we are under a lot of pressure because a lot of times we find ourselves having to do more with less resources that we have, but we are doing our best to make sure that the consumer is taken care of.
And how do they get in touch with you? How can the public or the consumer who is disaffected get in touch with you?
Consumers can reach us through our website, which is www.cgso.org.za, and they are able to lodge complaints through that medium. We are also present in the social media. We have a Facebook page wherein the consumers can lodge, contact us on that, and then we can direct them through other mediums in which we can be able to assist them. And they can also phone our call center or phone our office at 0117812607.
Thank you very much for joining us, Madam CEO. That was Queen Munya from the regulatory body, which is basically the ombudsman that is set up by the industry itself. The ban on cigarettes during lockdown has affected smokers from all walks of life. But instead of kicking the habit, most smokers have found some form of other tobacco. Not very legal, is it? No matter the price or the quality. Well, in the process, they have also come up with creative and novel ways of getting their favorite fix.
The sudden and complete ban on the sales of cigarettes during lockdown have left smokers with withdrawal symptoms from nicotine. It has also affected the turnover of shop owners, as well as added frustration of not being able to supply their customers with what they ask for.
Turnover is every month like is 100,000, but now it's coming 50,000, something like that. It's very effective. And customer is giving to a lot of complaint about from the cigarette. They want cigarette. They don't worry about food, but they worry about from the cigarette. So everyone is complaining about from the cigarette.
Some symptoms of nicotine withdrawal include depression, headaches, coughing, sore throat, difficulty concentrating, anxiety, and irritability. It drives smokers to find cigarettes, causing them to disregard financial, lawful, or even health implications.
It is extremely expensive, actually unaffordable. I mean, 180 Rand for a packet that used to cost 20 Rand, so it puts a big dent in your pocket. I don't know if the aim was for us to stop smoking, but no, I haven't stopped.
I make a plan for a little cigarette, because I don't drink, so they can't take everything away from you. At the end of the day, it affects my whole household, because I can't use the money for my children's food for one packet of cigarettes.
We make a plan to buy cigarettes, because that is, how can I put it, that is our pleasure, and that is what calms us here on the sea, or wherever we are.
Strange-looking, exorbitantly expensive, new cigarette brands bought on the black market have made their way into communities. But the cigarette ban has also brought out the creative side in smokers, who have been coming up with all kinds of novel ways to keep on lighting up. From rolling pipe tobacco into a zol, to cutting up decades-old Cuban cigars and making cigarettes from it to make it last longer. Some people have even tried smoking tea, claiming that rooibos is healthier than black tea. And if all else fails, that last bit of leftover cigar can even be put into a pipe to make the most of it. But thus far, nothing has stopped smokers from getting their nicotine fix. Linky Bierman, SABC News, St. Helena Bay.
Addiction is real. I wonder what Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma would have to say about that, Zol. With a ban on alcohol during level 5 to 3, the sale of pineapples had skyrocketed. It's not only the lure of homemade pineapple beer that has made them so popular, they also have massive health benefits. Now, Bathurst in the Eastern Cape is the heart of the pineapple industry in the country. Normally, 10,000 fresh pineapples are sold countrywide per day. Now, since the ban of alcohol, almost 100,000 are being sold daily. The price has tripled.
Pineapples take 2 years to bear fruit. The Cayenne pineapple is popular for its juice and can weigh up to 4 kilograms. It is also the pine of choice for making beer.
After 2 years, you get what we call the first ratoon. So this is the first ratoon crop, and the first ratoon crop is always sweeter than your plant crop. It's a unique fruit because each little segment is actually a fruitlet. Sales have definitely increased by triple, if not more, 100%. Fresh fruit sales are incredible. The demand for pineapple is outstanding at this stage. So we are selling over 100 tons of pineapples, fresh pineapples daily, to the different markets.
It is a unique fruit with several health advantages.
It is highly rich in vitamin C, and the bromelain in pineapple, which is a natural anti-inflammatory, is very good for a person. In fact, there's more vitamin C in a pineapple than in an orange. And especially for a cough mixture, fresh pineapple juice is the best thing you can use.
The majority of this fruit is processed in East London. The extract is exported. The crowns of the fruit are removed before processing to be replanted. Those sold as fresh fruit keep the crown. It is a labour-intensive business and transport is costly.
20% of my annual production will hopefully go towards the fresh fruit market now, where previously it was 100% to the juice market. So, I think because of the demand, hopefully the price will also be slightly adjusted in the right direction for us.
The advent of lockdown and the ban on alcohol has seen the humble pineapple establish itself as a fruit to be reckoned with. Veronica Fourie, SABC News, Bathurst.
On Skype now, we are joined by COSATU's national spokesperson, Sizwe Pamla. Welcome, Sizwe. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Sizwe. Good evening, Sizwe. Well, let's just take a brief ad break while we connect our lines to Durban, where we will be joined by Sizwe Pamla. Welcome back, and we do apologize for that technical glitch. On Skype, we had COSATU national spokesperson, Sizwe Pamla. Good evening and welcome to Economics Unbound. Did you see the pineapple story, Sizwe? Where people are mucking a plan? What did you think of the unique Zol idea?
Well, look, this is really dangerous because you are talking about inhaling something that is unhealthy, something that has not been approved by health experts that it can be inhaled. Look, it's a bigger problem. We need to have a bigger conversation about the levels of addictions. And of course, at the end of the day, we need to remember that there are people who produce this, which means there are jobs at stakes. But generally speaking, as a country, we do have a problem of addiction, the abuse of alcohol, the abuse of and already we have a very high disease burden. If you look at how overwhelmed our health facilities are at times. So these are the conversations that we need to have to say it looks funny when you look at it, but the reality is that it is unhealthy.
And it is almost tragic. It would be even more so if it weren't that we are concerned about the country and we have seen levels of crime and levels of violence increase since the lifting of the restrictions on alcohol. But you had a CEC as COSATU this week, and you took a long, hard look at the condition of the working class in our country, and you found that we are in shabby shape. How would you describe the condition that the working class in our country is in? Hello, Sizwe?
Well, look, yes.
We can hear you clearly. We're struggling a bit with the network, but we can hear you very clearly. Please proceed.
Yeah, look, the Central Executive Committee that was convened over the last 2 days, from Monday to Tuesday, it discussed a number of issues, but at the center of really what we're discussing is the state of the economy and the levels of corruption in the country. You will remember, if you go back, that actually when we came out as a federation and we're pushing for to actually use the reserves to take care of those workers who were seated at home without any income. The first thing that we encountered was that the employers who were supposed to process this money and hand it over to employees decided to steal it. Now, on top of the fact that we had people who were struggling to actually put food on the table, we were faced with the problem of corruption at the get-go. So that then became a theme. After that, we started to struggle with PPEs when everybody was talking about the lack of these PPEs. And then we started to hear stories about tender allegations. And workers on the ground were telling us that these PPEs, they're either of poor quality or they don't get them at all. So these were some of the issues that we had to discuss. And then you look at the opportunism of many of the private sector companies that have decided that they are going to retrench workers without really presenting any justification, just because we have a deadly virus, just because there's COVID-19, people just believe that if they tell you that they are retrenching because of COVID-19, it's enough. And now they are no longer prepared to prove that there is a need to retrench and open their financial statements. So these are some of the issues that we're discussing. But we were then saying it doesn't matter what we are trying to do as a country. If we have the levels of corruption that we currently have as a country, we are not going to survive for long. Already, we have millions of people struggling to have 3 meals a day in this country. And to hear that the little money that lenders still borrow us, because lenders have actually given up, most of them. Some don't trust that we can pay back the money that we borrow. Some are saying we can still give you money, but at extortionate prices because you have been downgraded. But it still doesn't resonate with our politicians. It doesn't resonate with the decision makers and policy makers that we
Beyond taking to the streets next month to protest against corruption, rampant corruption in both the public sector and the private sector, what else is your program of action to deal with predatory elites?
Well, look, we have decided that the biggest mistake that we committed was that we trusted that we have a government that is ready to step. We are not outsourcing that mandate anymore. Starting today, we have decided that in all sectors, unions need to stand up. We are having an engagement with various trade union federations, with other unions, to make sure that we first unite workers. We are uniting workers because we are going to do this ourselves. So in each and every sector, we are going to be confronting employers. You would have seen that at the National Health Laboratory Services, those workers decided to stand up. Our affiliated union, NEHAW, has already presented a national plan of action. The federation itself is coordinating all of these activities. We will be focusing on the public service, but we already have got engagements. For an example, if you look at Telkom, we have a date with Telkom. If you look at the fact that their CEO was paid 23 million in 2019, yet in the last 12 months, they have retrenched 2,000 workers. There are 220 workers who are actually facing the chop as I'm talking to you right now. So we have decided that we are not going to outsource this. And we are not also going to continue to sit in boardrooms, because the only language that these employers understand is the language of the streets. So we are mobilizing, we're working together with progressive organizations, we're working together with other trade union federations, but we're also inviting South Africans to join us and other civil society organizations to join us, because this is not just a workers' fight, but it's a fight that has to be won by the nation.
Well, on that note, that's all we've got time to. Thank you very much for joining us from Durban. COSATU spokesperson Sizwe Pamla. Now let's take a small break. Now, every successful entrepreneur will tell you that cash flow is the lifeblood of every business, and that without it, your business will simply not survive. More on that, we have Gys Wilson. He's the product head for guarantees at FNB Bank. Hi, thanks for joining us today.
Good evening, Tadeka. How's it going?
Let's talk about money. Now,
for sure, anytime.
Many businesses are really in a cash crunch at the moment because of COVID-19. How are you advising that they handle cash, and how do they relate to the whole issue of hiking the cost of the prices of services and goods?
For sure, I think like you're saying, cash flow is key, and that's very important for us. So first thing to understand is, what is the working capital position of a business? Which means that what's the funding available for a business to run its day-to-day operations? And there's a few things you can look at to help you analyze how good your business is turning your assets into cash flow. And looking at the working capital cycle is one of those measures. So an example is, if you're making sales, how long does it take you to collect your debtors? And if you're collecting them in 60 days, potentially offering them at 5% early settlement discount, which means the money could then possibly flow in sooner.
Now, at what point does a business then see itself as accountable to broader society and make the decision that we will conserve cash and we will pass on some benefits to the consumers of our services or goods and not hike prices at a time like this?
I see. So then the key is trying to find ways to save on your own expenses in the business. And I think a way of doing that is utilizing instruments such as guarantees in the business. So if you can manage your own expenses on internal, then you can actually hold off on increases to your consumers, which ultimately you need in the long term and the short term.
What other advice would you give about conserving cash in the business at a time like this?
I think an example, like I've mentioned with the guarantees, if you look at a lot of businesses are still leasing their premises, and they probably had to provide a deposit up front to the landlord. Utilizing a guarantee issued by a bank or an insurance company, you can actually take that money back, get the guarantee issued, and actually use that money in your business, or potentially put it into an investment account to earn interest or compound interest ultimately.
Now, South Africa in general is going through a very difficult time, and many businesses have lost customers, they've lost, the supply chains have been disrupted. What is your advice? What is businesses' demand from government? How can government assist businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, to recover at a time like this?
Sure. I think if you look at it, the bank's made quite a few, or the Reserve Bank itself has made quite a few loan schemes available. And I think it's working through the banks as well as the IDC to provide that possible funding to small businesses. So definitely approaching your bank, approaching the IDC, as well as then some of the other potential players in the market to try and, the funding is available at very preferable rates.
But we hear from many businesses that they are told very often that they can't qualify. They don't qualify because the bank is using its normal lending criteria.
I think also that's where you can look at things like the IDC with the special funding they provided with very, very, very low rates to try and help that supply chain, especially if you look at the work they were doing during COVID, trying to get the PPE production up. Actually offering really favorable rates for companies that are able to increase that supply chain quite quickly.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I think that many businesses listened to your advice and gained much from it. Thank you very much. And now that's how we come to the end of Economics Unbound. Till next time, till next week, goodbye.